There we go. Ah, good. Just making sure it actually went. All right, so I'll wait for everybody to come in, and then I'll post this publicly. It's not posted just yet.
Okay.
But we've got the... Ooh, is this the right URL? Okay, we got... Ah, there's Steve. But we're still seeing your avatar, not a live video.
Yeah, it was there a moment ago.
Give it... Oh, I was going to say, give it a second. There it is. Now we're good.
Hey,
Right.
Steve.
Logan? We're missing 2.
Yeah, John and Stan.
There's John.
Is that it?
We've got...
Stan should be joining us.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay, I will kill my video. My mic is still on, so I can talk to you guys.
Okay.
All right, I haven't posted this publicly yet, but I can, if you want to just get started.
Okay.
And then Stan can come in when he comes in. All right. Pulling a trigger. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, we are live. There we go, and I will give you guys the... If you click on chat, there's the URL. That should work.
All right.
I'm clicking it to make sure it works. There it is. Awesome.
Cool.
I'll update my blog post and get out of your guys' hair.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I'll send the link to Chris, too, so he can...
And I'll note this is being recorded,
Oh, wait.
like the other ones on Ustream, but this is going to be recorded on YouTube. But I can make this publicly available once it's all done, too. I can download it, whatever. Okay, turning my mic off and handing it over to you, Logan.
Okay.
Do we all need to click on chat, or is it just...
I don't think we necessarily have to, because I'm going to be watching it for questions. So if you want to read it, click on it, but...
I'll note that in the Hangout window, there's a button that says chat, and if you click on that, you guys can chat privately, so if you want to send notes to each other or links or whatever.
Okay.
But that doesn't show up in the actual public G+ Hangout room.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, which one doesn't show up in the public room?
Sounds like
Chat.
anything we type in the chat window only appears to us.
Oh, okay.
You all have a separate Hangout window that opened up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you chat, that should be private. Treat it, though, like anything online, treat it as public.
Sure.
Just in case.
So how do I see the public chat? Sorry.
If you click on that link I put in the chat room,
Yep.
that'll open up. It'll be under My Circle, the last post I have on G+.
Sure.
And if you click on the date, it'll open it as its own window, and then you can...
So I just sent a note. Did that show up, Logan?
I see it, Stephen. It's there.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm trying to figure out how I can see the public chat so I can get questions from folks.
If you click on the link in that chat room, that should open in a new window, or you can, and I see Pookie Amsterdam is there.
Huh. Yeah, I'm not seeing a link to the chat anywhere on here.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So the comments underneath, is what you're referring to?
Am I on? Yeah, there we go.
So the comments I see-
In the window where you see yourselves and everything, in the upper left is a thing that says Google Plus on Air, and then underneath it says Chat Invite Screen Share.
Mhm.
Do you see that, Logan?
I see
anybody else
it
see
in the window for the panel, but not in the.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. In the panel, there's a link I put up. 108952553 blah blah blah.
Yeah, I clicked that, but okay, now I see. Now I see the chat. It just didn't work the first time.
Okay, do you see Pookie Amsterdam there?
Yep.
Okay, you'll probably want to refresh that every minute or so to see new
Okay.
comments. It's supposed to do it automatically. A little touchy.
All right, I'm just going to let them know that I'm going to take questions there.
There you go. That's odd. I don't see your comment showing up. Did you already write it? There it is. Okay. All right. Looks like everything's working. I'll
Excellent.
hand it off to you. Logan, I don't hear you. Does anybody else hear Logan?
I turned my mic off.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Turning mine off. Bye.
Bye. So, hello everybody. Welcome to the .con Tabletop Gaming Panel. We're going to be talking about game design, our favorite games, whatever you want to hear about. It's going to be mostly Q&A, so send us as many questions as you like, and I will open them up to comments from the other members of the panel here. So the first thing I want to do is have everybody do introductions. I've already pre-rolled the initiative for everybody. So with a 20 is Ryan Macklin.
Hi, I'm Ryan Macklin. I'm apparently high on initiative. I'm the creative director for Evil Hat Productions, worked on the Dresden Files role-playing game, and I'm a fan of Scotch.
All right. With a 19 is Steve Winter.
Hi. So yeah, Steve Winter. Currently freelancing. I went to work at TSR in 1981, and I've been working on D&D one way or another ever since then, between TSR, Wizards of the Coast. That's it.
All right. After him with an 18 is Will Hindmarch.
Hi, everybody. I'm Will Hindmarch. I'm a freelance writer and designer. I'm also currently on staff at Green Running Publishing. I'm the Dragon Age line developer for the Dragon Age role-playing game, tabletop role-playing game. And I do freelancing all throughout the hobby industry, throughout RPGs and some video gaming and all kinds of stuff. I do mostly writing, but I do a little bit of graphic design, and in the mix of all that, I do game design. And that's me.
All right. I rolled a 15 for myself. I'm Logan Bonner. I worked on D&D 4th edition quite a bit. Now I'm freelancing for various companies. I worked on the Mistborn role-playing game. I have my own game, Refuge in Audacity, that is available for free on the interwebs. I'll post a link to that in the comments. And I know all these fine gentlemen, which makes me a better person by association. With a 5 on initiative was John Harper.
Hi, I'm John Harper. I'm a freelance graphic designer and an independent game designer and publisher.
We also have Stan, who rolled a 3 on initiative, which apparently means he can't join yet at all. So hopefully Stan will be popping in later. But until then, you're stuck with just the 5 of us. So I wanted to start off by talking with Mr. Hindmarch here. You recently wrote a blog post that was about kind of in response partially to one of the designers from BioWare saying that you should be able to skip combat in the same way that you can skip cutscenes, and you kind of diverged for a few different paths on that. So do you want to give us a brief synopsis of that, and we'll talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The brief synopsis is, first of all, I think I have to preface by saying the issue I think is bigger than my little 4 or 5 sentence summary here is going to be able to cover. But what it is that if you can just mash your buttons through dialogue scenes and stuff in video games because you only sort of care about what dialogue options you're following, why can't you also select different outcomes from various combat options after you've tried them a couple of times to discover, okay, I think I know how to beat this boss, but I haven't actually figured out how I'm going to do it because I'm not fast enough or I didn't spec myself right or whatever it is. So that it's not just a matter of skipping combat, it's a matter of having a gameplay option by which you can opt out and say, okay, well, I'm going to sacrifice a certain amount of health or armor or ammo or special abilities or a combat token or whatever it is, and trade out that for the ability to proceed in a game even though I can't beat this one boss. And there's a lot of, I think, ramifications that designers can explore, especially designers smarter than me, that can use to make actual gameplay out of this as opposed to skipping gameplay. That it's not just a matter of hopping over a mechanic that you don't like or hopping over all the combat scenes and turning a video game into an interactive movie. It's a matter of making it into a gameplay element so that it is a design option on the table for any video game designer that wants to use it, but is not necessarily mandatory in the same way that having dialogue options isn't mandatory. Not every shooter has them, and not every game, therefore, needs to fall back on combat elements or on first-person shooter elements or hack-and-slash elements, whatever. They can focus more on the dialogue and the interpersonal or the puzzles or the exploration or whatever other elements, knowing that they have to stand up to the same scrutiny because people will be skipping other elements to get to them. And so I think it will help change focus in video game design in some exciting and I think not design lucrative ways, if I can say that, fruitful ways. The post is at, I should say, gameplaywright.net. It is still the top post, and that is GAMEPLAYWRIGHT, gameplaywright.net, if you want to take a look at it.
Okay. So it's interesting because a lot of games kind of, even when they feel the pressure to put in a bunch of different types of gameplay, a lot of times they'll half-ass all of the elements except for the one that's kind of most core to what they consider the main experience of their gameplay. Like they'll put in this is the vehicle section, but it really sucks because we didn't care about the vehicle section. Here are the puzzles; they were super boring. So do you think this sort of thing can make it so people hold those to a higher standard?
That's the hope, right? Is that if, for example, I'm playing the jet ski level, or I'm playing the hot air balloon ride level or something, and I'm like, okay, well, I kind of see what we're doing here, but it's not really for me. Right now in a game, you then have to just stop playing the game, and you miss all the rest of it. And so for the audience, it's a matter of, I don't know what the rest of the levels were like. My favorite level might be the next level, and I don't know that. I won't get a chance to see it. And for the designer, it means that the audience shrinks as they make a misstep in the middle of a game somewhere, because the audience now has to sort of opt out of if not the whole franchise, but they feel less attached to the game series or to the characters or to the story or even just to the gameplay, whether they're there for narrative or not.
Yeah.
The audience shrinks and they say, well, yeah, I meant to finish that game, but I never got around to it because I got stuck in the jet ski level or whatever.
Yeah.
And if that makes it possible
very
for people
few
to stay on
people
board.
finish games. It's like most people get a few hours in and then that's all they're playing of it. So it might be an interesting way for them to actually get the full experience.
So you bring this back to tabletop maybe. There's a game designer, David Berg. He's working on a game called Delve. And there's a component, I think it's for Delve, it may be for one of his other games. I forget what he calls it. It's sort of a detail spectrum that sits on the table for all the players and the GM to have access to. And pretty much at any time, I think, any of the players or GM can move the slider on the detail spectrum to say, okay, let's dig way down to bullet time here and cover every single beat, every second, every heartbeat of this action, or let's slide the spectrum way, way out to let's play the campaign against the Northern Hordes and just finish that and move on to the next thing. And it lets you dial your level of detail up and down. So you're still playing the game, you're still engaging with the mechanics more or less in a similar way, but in a sense you're skipping over stuff just by choosing exactly how granular you want to play. And because there's this artifact sitting in front of everybody, it gives something to point at and talk about and reference and touch and kind of keep it at the forefront of everyone's mind that you don't always have to play blow-by-blow combat, but if you want to, you set the dial at blow-by-blow, or you dial it back to minute by minute or whatever you want to do, and kind of put everyone on the same page for what you're trying to do at the table.
We'll see something like that in the Shadow of Yesterday, in the bringing down the pain mechanic.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And also in Ron Edwards' game Troll Babe, there's a mechanic for doing blow-by-blow combats or doing an entire conflict at one go.
Right. It's it was if I remember right, it's been a long time since I played the Shadow of Yesterday. If you could have a really quick one-roll exchange, but if somebody wants to press it, then it becomes bringing down the pain mechanic. It becomes more blow-by-blow. That's essentially somebody saying, no, this moment demands more detail. Although it can also be used for saying, I don't want to give so easily, and those could be one and the same.
Yeah, totally.
Just by making that explicit in the mechanic, so that you've got it becomes an aspect of play of actual a systematized element of the game, even though it's something that I think a lot of tables are doing kind of either in code, whether they know they're doing it or not, and they're like, okay, well, it's clear we beat these kobolds, let's just move on, right? They're interacting with an imaginary dial, with an imaginary system. And just making it explicit, I think, is not just a terrific set of progress. I mean, it's not just a terrific breakthrough, but it's essentially, it turns what is a cultural practice at the table into a design element, and that helps it to, once it's systematized, it can be built on and stolen and hacked and drifted and changed in really, I think, fruitful and exciting ways. And I don't see a reason why that can't work, why that's not just an element of game design anyway, because it's a choice, and once you express that choice in a structure such that we know what the consequences are, we say, yeah, we'll zoom in, and I know that by zooming in there's a greater than average chance that my character might die, or I know that I'll lose ammo or health or whatever, as opposed to zooming out and saying, I mean, there's all the things that you can tie to that decision, and that can vary from game to game to campaign. I think anything that makes that kind of inter-player communication, especially in the tabletop hobby, in tabletop play, not only more explicit, more frank, but faster, so that it's easier for everybody to say, I know what 3 means on that dial, I know what 5 means on that dial, and it gives us that express notion. And I think that's kind of wherever that idea comes from. I think it could work in a variety of game media, from RPGs to board games, card games, video games, all kinds of stuff would benefit from it.
We already see board games do some of that, at least in regards to an instance of play, like Agricola having the different decks you can put in. Although I've never played anything with Basic because it's so much game there that I don't think I'm going to master that anytime soon. But that's also typically within an instance of play, as opposed to at some different points of play, like we were talking about with the Shadow of Yesterday, with Troll Babe, with David Berg Games' Delve, where one instance of play could be several sessions of a campaign or something like that, and in this one 5-minute thing, we're saying high level, we're just gonna one roll. And another bit, we're saying we're going to spend an hour really getting into this stuff. And I see that being a huge difference between them, as opposed to, you could play GURPS, for instance, with the basic combat rules or the advanced combat rules. But if you were to change that up mid-campaign, that would feel weird to a lot of players.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's just learned. I think it feels weird to a lot of players the first couple of times you do it, but I think once people learn that dial is in play and that it's not necessarily either a decision that the GM makes, session by session, or that it's not a campaign front decision, that it can be made that it is a decision-making process, or I don't quite want to say a negotiation because it's kind of a loaded term right now for in what games mean for negotiating outcomes, but it's an ongoing process, and therefore it's learnable, right? So that even though and I think it's in the same way it's exciting at first for some groups, and eventually becomes almost old hat, but that doesn't make it less valuable, or doesn't make it harder to implement necessarily. It just means that that learning curve is there.
Well, I think with the GURPS bit that I bring up is much more cultural than it is seated in the design. Whereas the games other games we're talking about are saying you explicitly have these two and trigger them back and forth, as opposed to one being an option for play, and another one being an option for play. And given the terms that are going on there, basic combat versus advanced combat, there's a loaded sense of how well have you mastered this game? Can you handle advanced combat as a group, etc.
So Tracy Barnett has a question, kind of a follow-up on this topic. He's wondering if this sort of sliding mechanic can be mainstream. I think he's talking mainly about video games, but is this something that could be mainstream and be in the biggest games, or is it more likely to be kind of relegated to smaller and more experimental?
This is built into stations.
Actually, I would say L.A. Noire did something like that already. If you got into an action scene and you blew it 3 times in a row, it popped up an option. Do you want to skip this action scene and just go on to the next story scene? It's not like the action scenes in L.A. Noire were all that difficult to begin with, but it was there as an option. Now, it made you feel a little bit like a loser, because it was clearly this action scene is beyond you. Would you like to jump off?
Right, and it made you. It asked you that after you've lost it 3 times, as opposed to going in thinking, yeah, this is not for me right now.
Yeah. No, they were very quick. It generally only took you 5 or 10 seconds to blow it. So.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty clear example, right? That shows that absolutely mainstream games, be they, across media, can take advantage of this idea. I think it's just a tool in the toolbox. And for not all games do you necessarily want to have. Do you want to have every? You may choose which combat scenes are skippable and which are not over the course of your game. You may decide that this one is vital because it contains a narrative element, or because whether or not you fail on your terms of using this gun or that gun or whatever is important to the way it's an important decision point to the way the story goes, or the way the next level unfolds, or whatever. But having it as an option on the table is, I just don't see, I don't fully understand the argument against it, frankly. I understand why you would choose not to exercise that option, right? But to have the option present for the designer, at least, seems to me like a no-brainer.
Well, and I know I've played a ton of video games where you get to a point where you kind of feel like the designer is sitting somewhere laughing at you and thinking, ha ha ha, look, I made this scene so difficult to win that you're going to have to play it 20 or 30 times before you figure it out, or you manage to mash the buttons in exactly the right sequence. I would like to have that bypass option in a lot of cases, just because I don't find scenes like that at all enjoyable. After the 4th or 5th time of trying and failing, frankly, I'm tired of it. I want to move on.
Do you? Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we've had that experience in tabletop gaming too, where you are, where you're frustrated with the classic example is like the weird riddle door that you have to open by pressing the jewels in the right sequence, and the DM has such a clear vision of what you need to do, and the players are super confused by even what's going on, and the DM is saying, it's so obvious, why don't you just do it? And everyone's frustrated, and that it would be nice if there was a button I could push right then to say, okay, DM, this riddle sucks, let's skip it.
Yeah. Well, or DMs also have like, oh, they set up this challenge that's way too hard for you, and it's going to be totally obvious that this is too hard for you, and they're all going to know that. And then you get to the table, it's like, well, we can take these guys. That's no problem, right? Sure, they can't be tough as that dragon last week.
Yeah.
Oh, they had 15 levels of cleric. I didn't know that.
I've been blowing up here and there on some of the video game blogs lately as I sort of jumped very briefly as a video game designer. And there was something that I picked up somewhere that I think feels like it applies here, which is if you're designing a game and you're playing it and it feels like it's at just the right difficulty level, it's actually too hard. Because if you're playing the game and you're immersed in the game and you kind of feel like you know how the game is it feels like the same sort of thing with like the DM coming up with the puzzle, the like, oh yeah, no, this is just the right challenge level. Like if you're saying that and you're thinking about all the things you know about this setup already, then be it in design or be it in scenario design or whatever, it is probably too hard.
Yeah. So Enrique, newbie DM, commented that puzzles enter the realm of player intelligence versus character intelligence. But I think there's also that third dimension. It's character intelligence, player intelligence, and communication skill. Because it doesn't matter how smart the player is if you haven't clearly communicated all the bits and pieces. Like the door puzzle that John was talking about, it could be that it's a hard or a bad puzzle, or it could just be that, like, oh, it wasn't clear that these are all arranged in, in a pentagon, and that's significant, right? And that's where a lot of, especially puzzles, break down in gaming.
It also depends greatly on the permissions and expectations that are set by the game. Are we here to pit our wits against each other at the table in the classic mode, or are we here to, reveal dramatic truth or whatever we're here to do? If those permissions and expectations are set very clearly, then it could be a case where you can just skip that because the riddle is interesting to the characters but not to us as players. And when those things are very clear among the people at the table, it makes those decisions much easier, I think. Instead of one person thinking we're here to solve riddles and the other players thinking we're here to discover our characters' deep emotional states, that obviously it makes the door problem even harder to handle.
Using that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm going to do one more question on this topic and then move to another one. So Tracy Barnett asks, if you could add a dial to any published game, which one would you do it to? So I think we can do tabletop or video game, but in what game do you really feel like you need that ability to switch?
If the question is the dial in terms of what you can zoom in on, it's weird because in practice I essentially use that dial as like a house rule kind of thing anyway, and I've never been, frankly, clever enough to make an artifact for it, which is where I think the real breakthrough is in that makes it a great interactive tool. I think that's brilliant. But so to me, it's hard to say. Like I have things that are literally called dials with a capital D in a game I'm developing right now called Raised for Pelgrane Press using the Gumshoe system. That are kind of in this way. They encompass also difficulty scaling and stuff like that. But I built them in there because it's integral to the way that I run games, and so I don't know how to write and design stuff that isn't the way that I work anyway. So I had to write it from my perspective, and so it's weird. I mean, there's no one game that I'd be like, I learned this process in reaction to X.
Does anybody else think of a good game where it's like you really wish you could zoom in and zoom out? And maybe part of it is not just being able to do that, but being able to force that to happen when it would be good for the game, but the game master doesn't necessarily, or you're playing a video game and the video game has no ability to do so on its own.
I had part of the reason I put down Dragon Age 2 was a fight with, at this point it's been long enough, I don't even remember, but there was a point where I was, not really well spec'd out and not in the mood for the fight. Like I was not expecting like a boss battle to happen, but it was one of those like, surprise, boss battle. So in games like that where there are surprise boss battles, I was just in the mood to sort of, explore and, fight some, low-level things, just kind of unwind, and suddenly difficult boss battle happen. So, I mean, Dragon Age 2 had that, and I put down Metroid, one of the Metroid Primes, for that reason too.
I think I would like the dial in any game. I mean, I totally agree with Will that it's a tool that everyone uses, I think, to greater or lesser degrees, whether or not it's explicit. But where I would want an explicit dial as an addition to a game maybe would be a game that has very rigid time structures built in already that we may engage in sort of uncritically. Where, again, the classic example, like we're halfway through a fight in 4th edition and we can tell that we're going to win it, but we have another hour to go to finish off the rest of the monsters. And it can be real easy, I think, without an explicit sort of a handshake up front that we're allowed to skip it. It's easy to fall into that mode that, okay, we have to grind this out, we have to finish it out. So adding an explicit dial to a game that already has a built-in time structure as a way to sort of give you an out when you want it. I think that's where I would want to add it in. But like Will said, it's kind of already there in the toolkit. It just may be an unspoken thing.
That makes me want to raise a quick side issue about linearity and how that relates to this process, which is that when you've got a fight in which the outcome is we have to succeed for the game to continue, whether it's a tabletop game or whether it's in video gaming, whatever, then there's much less reason to not just determine as quickly as possible what the outcome is, that we can in fact achieve success and then move on, right? But in a game in which the fail condition is going to count, in which and I think this is interesting coming from tabletop RPGs where accepting whichever outcome happens is more common than in video games in which you can't progress until you beat this battle. I think that's one of the reasons why we tend to grind out more combats in tabletop RPGs, even though it's easier for us to skip them, is because we don't know. A couple of critical hits could change everything. Mm-hmm. Or if I decide I'm going to spend my hero point, I could turn this battle around, even though I don't really intend to spend it on these kobolds or whatever. So the outcome is, because we're going to commit to the outcome in either direction, that fact that it is still a branching point, that the linearity isn't there, means that you're still tempted to honor the process, just in case somebody changes their mind partway through or a new decision crops up that changes the outcome. The more linearity is built in, I think the more skippableness should be built in.
I'm going to go with a dark horse here. I'm going to say that I want to see a slider in Monopoly. Both so you can skip the end game and just kind of say, all right, well, after this, now 20 years down the road, this is what has become of our society. Zoom in.
Switch to the aftermath.
Yeah, when you're spending your last $5 for rent on Oriental Avenue, you can zoom in and see the Thimbles family starving.
I think you just designed a new game, Logan. The Monopoly 20 years after. That sounds like fun.
I think we're playing that game right now.
Yeah.
In real life, it's a LARP.
I want out.
Well, and I think any game, something like that is going to be more valuable the more system the game has to begin with, right? If you're playing a very simple role-playing game, it's kind of assumed that there's an awful lot of off-the-cuff decision-making going on. But as was pointed out, in a game like 4th edition, there's so much system, you don't always feel like you can just shortcut that. And so you almost need another system at that point to say it's okay to short-circuit some of the system.
Yeah.
Whereas, a much simpler game, a game like Rysis or something like that, this would just never come up.
So I wanted to move on to another topic. Manticalis has asked whether each of us prefers to be a game master or a player at the table, and how that's affected our perspective when we work on games. So I'm just going to pick somebody. So let's start with Ryan.
I like doing both, which is at first an unhelpful answer, but I found that I've met a lot of GMs who really like to just GM, and by taking time to do both, that's helped me, figure out, what I like, what I don't like, but works really, really well, in spite of the fact that I don't like it. But I tend to GM probably more than I play, just because that ends up being my social function at various events.
Okay. John, how about you?
I think I prefer GMing, but I'm obviously deeply in love with the hobby in all of its forms. So it's only a tiny margin that I prefer GMing. But as a designer, I think both roles and also playing games that don't have a GM definitely helps the designer mind, playing every possible iteration of the roles in our hobby, I think is critical to be a game designer. It's at least for me, often design comes from a place of frustration or pain at the table, and thinking how this can be solved or smoothed over or fixed in some way, and sitting in all the different seats, I think, helps you identify those rough patches and have different experiences that definitely color where I'm coming from. In fact, we could probably go through everything I've ever designed, and like each mechanic and each element probably pinpoint the thing that happened in this one game, this one time, as a player or a GM that sparked that, or in a GM-less game that sparked that mechanic. So I think for me it's more like cross-training, like play everything, do every weird little corner of the hobby to experience as much as possible.
How about Steve?
I would definitely, I enjoy playing, but I enjoy being a GM more. And I think what really appeals to me about it is the juggling aspect of it. When you're a player, you basically have one thing on your mind, and that's me. What am I going to do next? How can I contribute to the big thing? When you're the GM, you're trying to keep a dozen balls in the air all at once, and constantly riffing off what 4 or 5 or 6 other people are doing. I just get a big kick out of pulling all those pieces together and then hurling them all apart and then pulling them all together again.
Right, Will?
For the longest time, I didn't just prefer to GM, I vastly preferred to GM, and I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago that changed. And I think part of it was because I had some very limited and limiting experiences as a player, depending on the groups I was in, and that made me a better GM because I knew what I wanted to do to make play fun for as many people as possible. But then I spent a fair number of years where I was GMing almost exclusively. And that kind of to use the cross-training metaphor, which I think is great, that let some of my other skills atrophy. And so when I got back into multiple campaigns that I was as a player in, and I realized that there are a lot more productive ways that I can do world building on both sides of the DM screen, if you will, that I can help out with the world building as a player, and I can influence that in some ways, which is something that I really enjoy in RPGs one way or the other. So it's a much closer race for me now. I still prefer to GM in part because, I was just about this the other day, one of it is because I'm selfish and I get more face time when I'm a GM because I'm always in play. So I always get to do something. So I'm never bored. So that's the juggling aspect. But another big part of it is that I feel like I'm being more helpful. Like I'm able to do more for everybody at the table when I'm GMing, as opposed to when I'm a player. It's like, well, if my class can't do this or if my character build can't do that, then there's a period in which the smart thing to do is to just let other people talk and let everybody else, and there's less facilitating going on. And that's that's also, I think, valuable to know as a player is when it's your chance to back away. And doing that has taught me more is when it's your turn to back away as a GM. So it's a valuable skill. But having had nights where you can spend 2 or 3 hours sitting and you're constantly exercising the option to not interfere, and that's the smart play to do for 3 hours, is not as satisfying to me as GMing is. And so there's that collision. I don't want to say powerlessness, but that's a big part of it as a player, where you're like, I wish something else was happening, or I wish I could say this, or I wish the monster would act this way, or whatever it is. GMing rewards my flighty behavior, I guess. So I have a tendency to prefer it, but it's for completely unchivalrous-based reasons.
Yeah, I personally find that, especially in college, I DM'd mostly, and I've kind of become more of a player the more I've gotten to know people who are really good at running games, because I have an alternative rather than, having like a couple guys who are okay. I know a lot of people who are really great at running, and I kind of prefer to run games as a game master if they don't require much prep. I really like doing that, but the more kind of homework I have to put into it, the less I enjoy it.
There's a thing about the number of good GMs, I think, that are made by bad gaming sessions. I almost said games, but I'm using the synonym there, right? But from bad campaigns or whatever, that they go, you know what, like John's designs, where it's like, I have a real problem with this and I want to fix it. I want it to go a different way. I want this to work differently. And I think that's interesting, because I think one of the big problems with the way the RPG hobby propagates is that the number of people who are exposed to the hobby because a seat opens up at a table where somebody left because the game is only okay, the campaign's only going all right, and so they get exposed to a campaign that's only okay, and they think, oh, I guess that's what this is. That's what this kind of hobby is like. And then they either don't make up their mind to do it different, or they just leave. Then how many people get exposed to the hobby and back out because they were exposed to a mediocre game, because those are where the seats are opening up, is in mediocre tables? I don't know, but I fear it's an as yet unsolved problem. Is that really great GMs don't have openings at their tables, and so, your friend that's a really great GM, she has trouble getting new players to show up because she's already got a full table, and it's like, well, I don't want to risk the game by adding a 10th player or whatever. So I think that the trajectory of how many GMs are made by being players first and then don't go back is also a problem. In that you should always, I love playing new games, so I like going back and learning new games and going back and having players run games so I can see new ways to do it. And I think those two hurdles, the number of GMs that come out of bad games, the number of GMs that don't go back to play again, are cultural issues that can be addressed, but that there's no product right now, or there's no movement that's really renovating that situation instead of addressing it.
I don't entirely agree with that.
Okay.
Maybe in an overall sense, but I don't have a good picture of what overall means in the hobby community. But I do have a pretty good picture of where I'm currently living. So I'm in Oakland, California for the next few weeks, and there's a great game store here called Endgame. And me and a whole bunch of other people are really big about, we've got these mini cons where we're running indie games all the time. I used to host an event once a month. There are all sorts of things that a bunch of us are doing that actually does bring in new people. We've got recently, we did a really interesting cross thing with improv folks and gamers getting together for an improv with gamers thing. And I've met at least a half dozen people in the last few months who have said, oh yes, this has been my first game, and it was at one of these endgame mini-cons. So I think there is an environment, if you can find it or create it, in this case, and they're always created by somebody who's dismayed that it doesn't exist already, where you can take these great GMs or good GMs and put them in the situation where people can sample a game, and often these convention one-shots are built well to be a sample as opposed to jumping it midway through somebody's campaign. And also, this is not necessarily untrue of convention games, but you could also have that situation where it's it ends up being a great GM, but an off night, and they happen to have a free slot at their table for whatever reason, which can also be it's that same introduction point. Like it's not necessarily that all times where people walk away from one session of playing a game is because of a bad GM, because the whole table. Just everything else just, happens to be there. I know we've had nights where everyone has just felt beat from work, and we used to play on Friday nights and all at office jobs, and we've had, those games where somebody happened to come in to an empty space on that night, they would have walked away, and, they would have come up, 2 weeks later and been like, holy crap, this is awesome. But, with getting back to the earlier point, you can create that space, with other people. And I think that's a more optimal space than inviting somebody into your ongoing campaign.
No, you're absolutely right. When I say that people aren't addressing it, that's not accurate anymore. Certainly a lot of it's going on, and I don't know where. I don't want to speculate too much on why it's happening now, and it wasn't happening when I wanted it to be happening, 10 years ago, and I was looking for games. But it is happening. You're right. A lot more people are doing it, and so it's certainly an addressable problem. But I do think it's still, not every gaming hub has its improv scene that is meshing with the gaming hub, and not everybody has the Seattle, gamers conventions, and not everybody has a PAX nearby, and not everybody has a Gen Con when they need it and everything. So it's an ongoing process, I guess.
Right, and I'd say 3 years ago, this place didn't have the improv scene that was somewhat integrated or somewhat touching the gaming scene. So it's not having it isn't the same as not being able to have it.
Right. Yeah.
So I've got another question from Pookie Amsterdam asking, do we feel any limitations in creating games for people outside our demographic, like women or people who are over 40, who most of us aren't over 40? Are there? So does anybody have any comments on that? Have you worked on games that are for outside your demographic?
This is something that we're struggling with right now, or recent result, but right now, Leonard Balser and I are working on the text for Fate 4, and our first question is, who's the audience for? I'm probably going to get some disagreement here, but I, don't think that there's a huge amount to gain with most games by trying to make it non-gamer friendly. I think there are some games where that's definitely the case. I feel like maybe, Fiasco is one of them. But for the most part, games get introduced to people who are another gamer, as opposed to randomly picked up, because that's how we're marketing them, because that's where we can put our tens of marketing dollars if we're rich. So if I'm looking at my demographic as gamers, then no, I'm never making a game outside of that. If we're looking at Fate 4, our demographic includes people who are new to Fate 4 because someone else introduces them. And that's changed quite a bit of the text, whereas the first draft of it was assume that you have played a Fate game before. And so just working out that target audience thing has been hard, because we've been having to get out of our heads from playing this game for years.
Yeah, I find that most games demographically are kind of made for gamers first, and so I personally haven't really worked on stuff that is directed toward female gamers or gamers of color, and I feel a limitation just personally because when I have game ideas, they're just kind of coming from my own mindset, and I don't usually think in somebody else's head when I'm trying to come up with a game. And I look at somebody like Daniel Solis, who has a much broader kind of outlook, and his game concepts aren't coming from oh, I'll make a steampunk game, or I'll make a Cthulhu game, and I kind of feel the need to kind of expand my interests so that I can make games that aren't just in those same small buckets that most games tend to come out of.
You know, one of the games that occurs to me immediately is actually one of yours, John, which is for aimed at kids with the adjective or adverb building.
The Wildlings.
The Wildlings, which
Yeah.
is how much did you aim that intentionally at? Like, did the mechanic arise, and then you said, you know, this would work well for people who aren't gamers yet, or did you design that mechanic for that purpose?
That one was designed for parents and teachers, you know, to present to kids. It wasn't really designed for kids directly, but that was definitely a design constraint for that. A challenge to myself to see if I could come up with a game resolution mechanic that also taught vocabulary words and some grammar skills. So yeah, it was definitely, you know, set out to meet that challenge.
And that's I think that's really fascinating in part because there's only so much. I don't want to sound defeatist. There's only so much that the game text can do to appeal to new gamers from whatever sector they're coming, whether they used to be gamers and they weren't now, or they're video gamers, or they're not video gamers at all, and they're coming from either board games or from reading or from fiction. They're coming for the genre, whatever it is that attracts them. I think there's a real meeting halfway that has to go on, and what that means is essentially that the text has to be open, the text has to be accessible, without necessarily diminishing the whatever it is that's appealing to the current audience. But the marketing has to kind of go the other angle, right, and has to attract people in to read the text also. Because the text on its own, there's only so much that cover art and a logo type and stuff can do to convince somebody to open a book they see on the shelf at the comic book store. I mean, it's a lot, but I still think it's only so much.
Yeah, John, I think you were mentioning the other day how much you like reading the introduction and the what is role-playing kind of stuff in different games.
Yeah.
Which is ostensibly meant to get people interested in them, especially if they've never played.
Totally. I feel like this topic is gigantic, and I wish we could have an entire panel about it. It's really important to our hobby. Vincent Baker right now on his blog is writing some really great stuff on this topic. His blog is called Anyway. It's Vincent Baker, and he's talking a lot about accessibility, the hurdles that people have to cross in order to get into the hobby, and there are many, and which is unfortunate, but that's true of almost every hobby. It's not just ours. But I think Will was definitely hitting on something important there, which is it's marketing and design together, but the way games are presented is definitely a huge factor in terms of who feels comfortable even approaching the hobby. If all of your game books present white dudes and white chicks in chainmail bikinis, that you're already creating this barrier that you don't need to be creating, just because it's unexamined, that's just how it is, and you're not thinking very critically about the art direction, or, for example, or the inclusiveness of the text, or whatever. There's all kinds of issues here, and I think it's impossible to have like a soundbite answer really, but I'm very excited to see that there are people in our hobby that are very serious about these issues, and are Joe McDaldno and Jackson Tegu and some of the guys in Olympia, Washington come to mind. There are many, Ben Lehman, Anna Kreider, who are sort of at the forefront of this as I don't want to call it a movement in the hobby exactly, but just making us as game designers and players and marketers aware that it's kind of our responsibility, if we want to reach different audiences, that and I think we ought to be, that there are more issues to it besides just our little tiny piece as game designer working on a mechanic or the text of our game. that it's just a really deep thing, and I encourage anyone who's playing in the hobby, who's working in the hobby, to explore that topic deeply. I feel like it's super important to the future of role-playing.
And recently there was a controversy because one of the D&D Next polls was talking about different elements that used to be in the game that weren't in the game anymore, and then had a poll, which of these should be in the game. And it had stuff like saving throws and THAC0, but it also had gender-based limits on ability scores, which I think was probably intended as a joke, but the fact that it was put up for discussion, I think kind of speaks to a lack of attentiveness to those issues. Because
Yes.
I think if those types of issues are on your mind, you don't put that option out there.
Yes.
Because you know that it's trouble, and not a good kind of trouble that everybody learns from.
So
You would almost think, I mean, this is an area where a game like, say, Mouse Guard, or going back a long way to something like Bunnies and Burrows, a game that just simply has no humans in it would have a bit of an advantage, as well as, appealing to a pure fantasy kind of player. The further you get away from our world, the more fantastic it becomes. But take humans out of the picture, and a lot of this drops away.
The other thing I want to mention real quick on this topic is the fact that we're all men on this panel today, all white men, and that has been the face of role-playing game design, and that's not the truth anymore. That there are a lot of women in the hobby who are designing and publishing games, and people of color, and it's much more diverse than it used to be. And I don't think it's necessarily our job to solve all those issues, or but to also be open, create spaces where those other voices can flourish, and that's already starting to happen. But I just wanted to just mention that even though today our panel is depressingly homogenous, there is a lot more going on in the hobby than just this, and that's another thing that I highly encourage people to seek out and explore.
I've also got a comment from Stan on the topic of designing outside your demographic. Unfortunately, he's having Google Hangouts hate him, so he can't actually join. But he's worked on Pokemon Junior and the Warriors Adventure game. And I know he's talked a lot about how much research they put into those and kind of figuring out how do 6-year-olds play games differently from 13-year-olds. And one of the things he's mentioned here is that a big piece of the design job is figuring out what activities your audience wants and likes to do and building a game around those activities. So rather than saying, well, this is what games are like, do these things, it's finding out what they want to do and making the game structure let them do those things.
I think you see some of that with Daniel Solis' games, like Happy Birthday Robot and Doe, Pilgrims of the Flying Temple.
Yeah, it's interesting. Those games are hard to categorize for a lot of people, but what they do is they play off of. I mean, they're storytelling games. They're clearly right. I mean, they're about building stories, but they're not exactly RPGs. Although I know a lot of people shorthand, say, "Oh, one of the great new RPGs I played is Doe." But because he's designed those games based off of the activity that is fun and not worried about which shelf it's going to go on or so much about what trajectory it came out of off of what other game, which I think a lot of great designers do and have done throughout the history of the hobby. But those games are great, I think, because in part because they do exactly what Stan is talking about, which is that they reward an activity that is fun rather than mandating that because I'm going to be on the shelf with other story games, it has to also include this or whatever. It has to have this.
I was involved with Doe way early on, And that was actually one of the struggles that, and I know Daniel's talked about this some, it was one of the struggles he dealt with was feeling like he had to make it a role-playing game. And I think just in one of our long conversations was like, well, what would it look like if it wasn't? And so, and then Doe and Happy Birthday Robot, and he's coming out with Pop and Lock's Last Heist, all these story-making games where you end up just writing out the story, and much like with John's Wildlings, although on paper as opposed to acted out, a game about, using vocabulary, a game about, grammar structure, sentence structure, things like that. And I see people say RPG not necessarily to categorize the game so much as to categorize its origins. It came from a particular community. And we can't call it a video game or a board game, so we'll call it a role-playing game.
So we have probably 12 more minutes, I'm going to say. I probably want to call it at 1:15, so I have time to get ready for my game. We've got two really fruitful questions here, I think, so I'm going to try to tackle both these in the time we have left. One is from Carrie Woodrow, who asks, do you find value in being involved in game sessions with both experienced and inexperienced players and GMs? And I'm going to kind of start off by saying, like I've run, especially D&D at conventions and stuff, and game days and that sort of stuff. I've run for inexperienced players a lot. And the thing that stands out to me most strongly is how much of the game is not important. Because teaching someone how the game works really illustrates what they actually need to know versus the vast expanse of rules that a lot of games have. I mean, most of this was for D&D, which obviously has, volumes and volumes of stuff you don't need most of the time. But I think a lot of games kind of put more chrome on than they need. And you kind of get to the core of what's fun about the game when you hand an inexperienced player, a pre-generated character and give them the basis of the rules and see what they gravitate toward. Other folks have some. Yeah, go ahead.
I think playing with inexperienced players, playing with new players is vital. Not just obviously for the health of the hobby, for making new players, for bringing people in and showing them how much fun this is, but the convention season is one of the things I look forward to because I get to play in demos with people either that are new to me or that are new to the game or that are new to the hobby. And every one of those is valuable experience points for me as a designer and for me as a GM because it's a chance to see that there were doors out of an idea that I didn't even know existed. That I'll be like, okay, this is the situation. I've run this adventure 5 times. And somebody goes, oh, I'm going to do this. And I've never thought about it before. And so much of the game is open, almost whatever game it is wide open or has these possibilities to it that new gamers will see because they're not, just because they're new, because they're not coming to it with a conception of, because they're not coming to it from any other game, they're not coming to it from something else, or because they are coming to it with an exception that's built out of just one particular game that they came into the hobby from or the video game that they love or whatever it is. And so it's that collision of ideas that I think gives off sparks that can set fire to great things. I think it's valuable experience points to play with new players and with new GMs. Like I love if I can to play with somebody's first time GMing. And to be supportive in that way too. So.
And if you're designing a game, having an inexperienced GM can be fantastic for playtesting too. You can really hear, this is what I wrote. See if you can figure this out and make it work.
When I do that, I like to put a dagger in my heart first because that's how I will feel almost inevitably when I first put the manuscript out there, and then I can pull the dagger out if it goes better than that. But, because it's almost always I give it to a new gamer and I say, yeah, here, I'll give it to my friends. How about you run this? And they'll be like, yeah, we got to the 3rd paragraph. We didn't understand what half these terms meant. I'll be like, oh, that's my fault.
I've got a comment for Stan that was actually on the last topic, but or it's not actually a comment from Stan, but it's something that reminds me of something Stan has said. So I'm going to kind of speak for him for a second, and hopefully he won't hate me too badly for it. But I remember being at the Ennies when Happy Birthday Robot was up for a bunch of awards. The Ennies are the EN World gaming awards that are given out at Gen Con, if anybody in the audience is unfamiliar with them. But I remember after the Ennies, Stan was talking about how, at first he was like, he saw somebody from Paizo giving an acceptance speech and talking about how Happy Birthday Robot was cool. And he found out afterwards that he had never heard of Happy Birthday Robot and just thought, the cover art was neat or whatever. And it can be kind of daunting in the hobby when you know people who are in the big companies and who are in high positions who aren't paying attention to kind of the innovation at the kind of middle level, who are like, you have to watch out for that sort of ignorance of innovation, because that can be really problematic. And that's one of the reasons that change isn't happening as quickly as it should be, is because folks aren't always keyed into the kind of conversations that are happening at the grassroots level. I really talked a lot for Stan there. Put all sorts of words in his mouth.
I thought I was looking right at him.
That's a limited information problem that I think I was going to bring up early on. It was a question of how much information the GM gives the player, but I think it's actually just true throughout the hobby when it's such a social hobby. And the question is that there's information that's not going in all kinds of directions, where people aren't hearing the conversations that are going on in what is really a very small space as far as the hobby goes. That just 2 cubicles over, if you will, is a conversation that's going on about the role of this or the power of that. And it would be great if the guy 2 cubicles over or the woman 2 cubicles over in the other direction were all invited into that conversation. There's so much great information to be shared that's not being shared. And it's not necessarily like the fault of somebody's not paying attention over here, or these people aren't stepping up and saying their bit over there, because a lot of it's out there. Part of it is the fact that the hobby is actually, I think, growing and diversifying at such a rate that it's hard when we don't have a centralized location. There's no place that you can go to Monday morning and say, okay, so what happened last week in game design for the hobby, and just get a good dose of the new ideas that are going on. There's so much. I spent a lot of time just trying to keep my finger on on the pulse. Is there a worse metaphor? But just trying to keep up a little bit on what's going on and all the ships that are coming in and out of port. And I'm vaguely informed. There's all kinds of stuff that I miss. So I have a lot of sympathy for the situation, for the people in the situation that aren't getting all the data. But it's going in both directions, where there's questions about distribution that aren't being answered for people that could use that information, questions about publishing, questions about design, questions about text layout, that everybody has to relearn because the hobby doesn't have a system to share this stuff. Because I don't want to speculate why, because it'll be a whole half hour. But
I'm going to break out one more question here from Ian Ramsey. How important is it to find out how much your audience cares about real-life issues in their game? To what degree do you ignore their pig-headedness and publish inclusive products? Is it worth tackling the subject if the audience doesn't care? And I think that's something that, especially with the recent Mass Effect controversy, we saw a lot of players saying, why are you forcing me to have the option to play a gay person when I would never possibly want that? Which I think all of us, and hopefully all of the audience, recognizes an absurd question. But how do you deal with kind of backlash from an audience like that?
I think if you are, this has been said about every form of art, and I think it's true in game design too. I believe it is my job to piss as many people off as possible with my work, not to make them happy and comfortable and safe. Of course, the game itself should be fun and easy and inviting, but being provocative, pushing boundaries, going to places where people aren't comfortable, 100% comfortable, especially with those type of issues, it's certainly not our job to remain conservative and hidebound and careful. Being progressive in whatever way you want to color that with your politics, I think that's what being an artist is all about. Like if you're not you're not annoying somebody. You're playing it way too safe.
Yeah, and I think annoyance and discomfort are separate dials, if you will, that you can tweak and say. Because I as an audience, I love being uncomfortable and happy. I love it when a movie or a game or whatever makes me like, boy, this is awkward, and I'm thinking about stuff I wasn't thinking about an hour ago, and that's really exciting. But when I'm genuinely annoyed, I tend to find myself genuinely annoyed, and that's a perfectly great response if art can provoke that. But I think it's all. I mean, it's like a giant mixing board. You always decide what you want to dial up and what you want to dial down, and the question is whether or not you actually got the response that you were, or at least the magnitude of the response that you were kind of aiming for. And I think it's important that we have games that are provocative, that are asking questions that other games aren't, and that doesn't necessarily mean that like every game should be asking the same questions or taking the same politics or the same position or whatever it is. Just the fact that there is a diverse questions being asked, diverse positions being taken, and that the audience has the option to buy those games that challenge them, those games that challenge them in a way that makes them, so that people can say, I love this game and annoyed the hell out of me, or they can say, I love this game because it harkened back to exactly a kind of fiction that I like. I think there is room in the hobby for both, but I think the hobby dies if either one smothers the other one. I think nobody should be getting killed, essentially. So it's, I don't know. I'm very moderate.
Yeah, I think you have to kind of design your games for an audience you can respect. You can't really, like, if some people in the audience, want you to not care about things, that's really their problem. And if you care about inclusiveness, you have to put in the work, because there's enough inertia on any collaborative project that there are going to be times when you're going to have to fight for it. Like a good example is if you're commissioning art for a book, unless you've kind of handpicked illustrators are going to be good at inclusiveness, you are going to have to fight to make sure everybody doesn't end up being a white dude. If you don't say anything, it's going to be a white dude or a white woman who's half naked. You have to make sure that you are clear and adamant about getting that in there, about getting anything that looks different from what's already out there, or it's just going to get swallowed up by people who don't even think about it.
And I think, yeah, that goes right to the heart of it, is that so much of it is just simply a lack of people putting any thought into it on the front end, and working from habit rather than from planning.
And making people angry, to go back to the Mass Effect example, making people angry at that from a purely mercenary perspective is free marketing. So I mean, if you're going to make a decision of something like that, and you're worried about any sort of like blowback from people being given a choice that they wouldn't take or whatnot, and they end up mouthing about it on the internet, you've effectively won. So make those sorts of decisions. If that's a reason you would not make a progressive decision, turn it into a reason you would.
And I think there are also some interesting things being done with kind of taking things that would be, kind of gamer stereotype game concepts and twisting them enough to make them more interesting. I think an interesting example is Philomena Young's working on Flatpak, which is a post-apocalyptic game, but it's an optimistic post-apocalyptic game. So instead of trying to get by in the horrid wasteland, you're trying to build things, fix things, make things better. So there's kind of a room in a middle ground between kind of the types of games that get made over and over again and really completely new concepts. There's a nice point where you can take what gamers expect and are familiar with and tweak it enough that you're going to make the concept of the game something that is different from what they might expect.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. I think every cliche is an opportunity, essentially, because you can take it and say, okay, but we all think this is true, or we all know this idea, so there's almost always fertile ground underneath that rock. If you turn it over and you say, oh, what if I make, that's a great example, the optimistic post-apocalyptic game, and Free Market does a great thing with that too, the post-scarcity kind of idea of taking something that could seem to be obvious in one way, that you say, oh, it's a game about this, and then you make it about things that are much more interesting or much more challenging or much more provocative, so that it's easy for people to approach it.
Yeah, or you've got like Smallville, which is a superhero game that's not a superhero game, or Blowback, which is a game about spies that's actually about interpersonal relationships. So those are, I think, some of the most interesting things coming out, because they kind of play into, to some extent, they play into the expectations of the usual power fantasy games, but they tackle them from a different angle to kind of expose a different side.
And I think they're effective because people can come to them and get generally like Blowback still creates great spy stories. It creates these great kind of thriller stories in the same way. So it's not like it's it's not hopping off one idea to another one. It's expanding the idea, and it's taking it seriously, and it's like you're saying, it's respecting its audience, so that when you get there, you don't necessarily reject the game, even if you reject a relationship in the game. So you're actually engaged now, and now you're interacting with it in a really, I think, effective manner. The game got you, right? It pulled you in, and now you're playing it, as opposed to looking at the cover art and rejecting it, like so many potential people in the audience, or I don't want to say have to, but do, because it's like, well, I have 10 of those games already. I don't need another sniper-suited, black-clad, whatever. Right, goth game.
This is the spy game that, instead of having 8 pages of different types of guns, has 8 pages on different types of interpersonal relationships. So it looks like we are about out of time. So I'd like to thank John and Ryan and Steve and Will and Stan, who is almost here, for joining me. And hopefully at the next .con Fest we'll do it again. So thanks, everybody. If you want to play in my Refuge and Audacity game, which is coming up at 1:30, I haven't checked the sign-up list, but I'm guessing there's still some spots open, and we'll be tweeting the link to that whenever we get a chance. So thanks for joining me, everybody.
Thanks a lot. That was fun.
Thanks, y'all.